Today, we're going to go over an incredible new announcement from the California Department of Housing and Community Development. Now that we've had all these new ADU laws, they have come out with an addendum to the 2025 ADU handbook. This is the kind of thing you need to print out. And when you're talking to your permit guys, you'd be like, no, no, this is what the state says. Okay. Because they now have teeth and they can fine a city up to 50,000 for violating these rules. So let's have a quick look at this. I'm going to share my screen here and I've already gone through and highlighted some of these items so that you can see. We're going to scroll through here and just go straight to the point. Interestingly, between ADUs have grown 20% in the state of California. Of course, we need more housing. And in 2023, ADUs comprise more than 21% of all homes permitted statewide. Notice they're calling ADUs homes because that's what they are. I think in 2024, when they run the data, they're going to find that ADUs have outpaced new construction homes. So that is pretty dang cool. So let's start with the meat. This is really important. Technical assistance is what they're calling it. You can ask questions directly to the state about whether a municipality or utility or agency is violating state law in their ADU portal. They are really using that. And you want to write it nicely because they're going to email back to you and the offending municipality and say, why, yes, Mr. Homeowner, you are correct. The city is in fact violating, which is great because that is your help and ally right there on the ground. Now, let's jump down, goes through all the terms and blah, blah, blah. Let's see. Yep. We're jumping through. Okay, here's the meat of it. The biggest thing they've talked about is objective standards. They require local agency to only impose objective standards on the ADU, which, quote, involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and are uniformly verifiable and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official prior to submittal. Period. So they can't say, well, I'd like you to save that tree, or I don't like where you put the window. Like that's not allowed anymore on ADUs, which is amazing in the state of California because it can get very subjective. So that is super important. So there's a whole bunch of new objective standards. Allows ADUs from detached garages from the proposed or existing primary dwelling. Precludes ADU construction from triggering a requirement that fire sprinklers be involved. Permitting processes have changed. We're going to jump into the meat of this. Hold on just a second, because I want to go. Some of this, the devil is always in the detail, right? So we're going to jump through here. Aha. So sometimes they're talking about multifamily ADUs, which are different than family ADUs, i.e. you can have more units. Here's one of the important things. And by the way, I was wrong. Anybody who says they're an expert on ADUs, holy smacks, I wouldn't trust that because I'm in the middle of it and I don't even know what's going on. It's like whiplash. A JADU may be created within the walls of a single family residence and not within an accessory structure. JADUs may not be expanded beyond the existing dimensions of the single family dwelling. So if you have an attached garage, the first thing you have to do is make it part of the house, and then you can have it permitted as a junior ADU. You cannot attach a junior ADU to a detached ADU. Now, I believe some cities do allow that, but that's the baseline state rule that applies to the majority of the state. I thought you could attach a JADU to a detached ADU. I was wrong. So just fessing up on that one. Bedrooms. Can a limit on the number of bedrooms in an ADU be imposed? No. A limit on the number of bedrooms could be construed as a discriminatory practice toward protected classes, such as familia status, and would be considered a constraint on the development of ADUs. Can an ADU have no bedrooms? A limit on the number of bedrooms could be construed as discriminatory practices. Can an ADU be denied due to building code violations on the primary unit? Only if the violations present a threat to the public. In other words, and I've seen this happen, an inspector's coming down and says, wow, that ADU looks great, but what's going on your house? You're not up to code. Yeah, they're not allowed to do that unless it poses a public threat. And I've seen that happen where maybe you have an old gas meter that's exposed and has issues, things like that. But that's really important because it's terrifying to have inspectors on your property when you don't know what the heck is going to happen here, right? Do state ADU laws and jurisdictions located in the coastal zone? Yes. Coastal Commission is now subject to ADU laws. Now, they still have to review it, but localities have to amend local coastal programs and review to comply with state ADU law. So that is pretty darn cool. Can affordable housing deed restriction be imposed on an ADU? No. So all those municipalities that are trying to say, oh, ADUs can only be for affordable housing, violating state law could be a $50,000 fine per violation. Can a deed restriction be imposed on a JADU? Yes. Okay. That's a trade thing. That was interesting. I have seen some deed restrictions, but we'll see. So that includes a prohibition on the sale of the JADU separate from the sale of the single family residence. So, okay, but that's a little confusing because they also said that JDUs no longer have to be owner occupied, and we'll see this in a second. So I'm not entirely sure. Fees. An impact fee charged for construction of ADUs must be determined in accordance with the Mitigation Fee Act, blah, 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 blah. A local agency, special district, or water corporation shall not consider ADUs as a new residential unit for the purposes of calculating connection fees or capacity charges. Whoa, that's a big one because I have seen sewer connection fees, transformer fees, all kinds of utility fees being charged that have no business being charged. Even Mello-Roos fees being charged because there's an extra residential unit on the property, not allowed. So this is why you want to print this sucker out. Can an impact fee be charged for an ADU less than 750 square feet? No. That it factors in local agencies, special districts, water corporations, all kinds of things. So max to avoid those fees, 750 is you want to get just below 750. Can I still be charged water and sewer connection fees? They shall be proportionate to the burden of the proposed ADU based on square footage. So if you have a teeny tiny ADU in a big house, you can't be charged like a big house. That's been a big issue, especially in the peninsula area and the Bay Area. Can fire sprinklers be required for ADUs? Only when fire sprinklers are required for the existing primary residence, then you have to have fire sprinklers in the back. However, so you don't have to have fire sprinklers if it's in the back. However, if a primary dwelling does not have fire sprinklers and an attached ADU is proposed that would trigger fire sprinkler requirements due to the increase in livable space, that requirement shall not be imposed upon the primary dwelling unit. So if you're having big units back there, you might have to fire sprinkler the back unit, but you still don't have to do the primary house. That saves a ton of fees. For the record, there is absolutely zero data that fire sprinklers saves lives, not an ounce or shred. It can save property, but let me ask you this. If the actuaries at your insurance companies thought that fire sprinklers did a lot, you'd be getting more than a $15 a year benefit for having fire sprinklers. And I don't care what they say, the cost is not 5,000, it's like 20,000. So I think this is really important. Um, okay, then they talk about there is a new link on grants. HCD is collecting a new local grant program list because the Cal HFA grants are used up. Inside Secret, we're working on a new grant with Cal Home. So there's some really cool stuff going on. It also talks about FHA, Fannie Mae, et cetera, that have, loan options. Of course, we offer all that stuff and a whole bunch more. Let's go detached ADUs. If a detached two-story ADU can be built according to the height allowances required under state ADU law, while remaining compliant with the building code, a local agency cannot deny an ADU application to create a two-story ADU, irrespective of underlying zoning that might restrict a primary dwelling to one story. Haha. So what's the height limit? 16 feet on a lot with a proposed or existing single-family, multifamily dwelling unit, 18 feet on a lot with an existing or proposed single-family or multi-dwelling unit, including an additional 2 feet to accommodate roof pitch that aligns with the primary dwelling when the lot is a half mile from a major transit stop or high-quality transit corridor. And so that's something to think about as two-story. I'm a big fan. If you just want to build one ADU, my recommendation is don't spread out over your land. Conserve your land and build up. It might cost a little more, but it'll also rent for a little more too, because you've got some nice land. On attached ADUs, 25 feet or the height limitation that applies to the primary dwelling. So it's going to kind of depend, and you're going to see these numbers be increased over time. But basically, the message to the municipality is, for heaven's sakes, let them have a two-story freaking ADU. Okay. Um, is there a limit on the number of stories in an ADU? There is no limit on the number of stories in ADU law. A local agency must allow at least 2 stories, and an attached ADU may be built to the height of zoning for the primary dwelling or up to 25 feet, whichever is lower. Cool. Are there tools to determine if a project qualifies for 18 feet in height? In other words, how do I tell if my property is near a mass transit corridor? Yes. There are the California State Geoportal features an interactive map and searchable database. So you look up your address to find out if you're on a high quality transit corridor, and that can tell you how big you can build, et cetera, how many units. That's also relevant to SB 9, right? SB 9 is the new law that allows you to build up to 10 units on a single family zone property within, I believe, 5 miles as a crow flies from a high quality transit corridor. So they're still mapping that out, but at least you can tell if it's within 5 miles on your individual property. Homeowners associations. Can CCNRs prohibit the construction or use of an ADU or JADU? Nope, 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 nope. They can make you have it looky-feely, matchy-matchy on the architectural style, but they cannot impose unusual restrictions or unreasonable costs. And they're pretty specific about this. So any delay in reviewing an ADU is a violation. Requiring an alteration to an ADU or JDU application that would cause the property owner to incur substantial costs is a violation. Imposing a condition that would necessitate reapplying or amending a building permit that substantially applies to a state ADU laws. Mandating that neighboring property owners must approve or agree to you having a JDU, not allowed. Restricting the placement or location that would make it unfeasible. Requiring major structural elements, not cool. Imposing restrictions that are not objective or not knowable or available to the property owners in advance of submitting the applications. and then levying excessive fees. So all the ways that homeowners associations are trying to get around ADUs. Mm-mm. And by the way, you are HOAs, homeowners associations can also be fined for violations of state law, and that's a $50,000 fine. Can an HOA review or influence a local agency's ministerial review process to create or serve an ADU or JDU? No. An HOA may not influence a local agency's ministerial approval. Local agencies must provide an approval process that only includes ministerial provisions for approval of the ADU permit application. This approval shall not include discretionary processes, provisions, or requirements. So, in other words, you either fit the construct of an ADU, but you cannot provide subjective input from anybody. It's approved or it's not. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. Do ADUs count toward the local agency's quota for housing? Yes, of course they do. Let's see. And they're addressed in they must be addressed in the housing element. So cities are required to tell the state how many houses, how much housing they're going to add to their area. So yeah, they've got to be allowed. Um, Junior ADUs can be no more than 500 square feet in size and contained within the single family residence. It may include a separate sanitation facility or may share sanitation facilities with the existing structure. Only one JADU may be created per lot zone for single family residences with an existing or proposed single family. Now, this is where it gets interesting because we've talked about flex space and can a JADU be created within a halfplex? And that's where you've taken a house and you've done an internal conversion, so there's really two units there. Interesting terminology, halfplex. A halfplex consists of two primary dwelling units on separate lots that share a dividing wall. One JADU is permitted in each halfplex in areas zoned for single-family use. So that's another way to get up to 4 units on the property. You have a halfplex and a halfplex, and then junior ADUs for each. If 2 units are attached on a single lot, i.e. a duplex, the primary dwelling is considered multifamily and would not qualify for an ADU. I don't get that. I'm not understanding that. So we'll see. Are JADUs required to have an interior connection to the primary dwelling? No, they don't have to have an internal connection. Are JADUs allowed in detached accessory structure? No, they're not allowed. In other words, they're not treating the detached ADU as a primary home for the purposes of adding a JADU. So, okay. Are JADUs allowed to be increased by up to 150 square feet when created within an existing structure? No. Are there owner occupancy requirements for JADUs? Again, maybe I'm misinterpreting the law, but it says yes. The owner must reside in either the remaining portion of the primary residence or the newly created JADU. Owner occupancy is not required when the owner is another governmental agency, land trust, or housing organization. Now, I thought state law had said no, it eliminated the owner occupancy requirements for JADUs. But so that's something else we got to clarify. What can local agencies require as part of an efficiency kitchen? An efficiency kitchen is a cooking facility with appliances, a food prep counter, and storage cabinets that are of reasonable size in relation to the JADU. A local agency cannot be more restrictive than this definition. So they can't specify, thus, requirements such as counter or cabinet sizes, specified electrical or gas connections, or appliances are not authorized. So let's face it, if you've got a studio unit, you don't need a big kitchen, right? A mini dishwasher, a mini burner stove, and a microwave oven and a small fridge. Like they can't require you to have bigger than that kind of stuff. It's that brings the subjectivity back in. Are junior ADUs required to provide parking? No. Can a local agency adopt an ADU bonus program? Yes. Yes. So this is where it's saying, look, if you municipalities want to go above and beyond, it is optional. There's no requirement, but yeah, there's benefits and it counts toward your housing quotas. So that is really important. Does HCD have enforcement authority over ADU ordinances? Yes. Local agencies are required to submit a copy of newly adopted ADU ordinances to HCD within 60 days of adoption, i.e., January 1. They've got to provide it by the end of February. So watch your local municipalities and what those codes are. HCD will then provide written findings to the local agency as to whether the ordinance complies with state law. If HCD finds that the ADU ordinance does not comply with state ADU law, the local agency must respond to HCD's written findings within 30 days. The local agency shall either amend its ordinance in accordance with HCD's findings or adopt the ordinances without changes, but include its findings in its resolution explaining why the ordinance complies with state law despite HCD's findings. HCD may continue to offer technical assistance. However, if the local agency does not amend its ordinance in accordance with HCD's findings or adopt a resolution explaining why the ordinance is compliant, HCD shall notify the local agency and may notify the Attorney General that the local agency is in violation of state ADU law. While an ordinance is non-compliant, the local agency shall use state standards for the approval of ADUs until the local agency adopts a compliant ordinance. So local rules, if they don't comply with HCD and HCD says so, they're not applicable. So do local agencies have to adopt an ADU ordinance? No, local agencies can simply choose to choose state standards. That's what San Diego County does. It's just easier. You just say, yeah, we go by state law. That's fine. Is a local agency required to send an ADU ordinance to HCD? Yes. They must adopt and submit a copy of the ordinance, could be the state ordinance. Do these laws apply to charter cities? Yes. And so on and so forth. So that's some of the, then we get into multifamily. How many ADUs are allowed on a multifamily site? An applicant may build up to 8 detached ADUs. That's interesting. So if you've got an apartment building with extra land, you can build up to 8 ADUs, and in San Diego County and city, you can sell them off. Can ADUs be created in multifamily dwellings? No, only ADUs. Can a permitting agency impose accessibility standards on ADUs converted from existing state? Maybe. My recommendation is everything you build should be fairly ADA compliant because you just never know. And frankly, ADA renters are great tenants. They're fabulous. They don't party. They're not, wrecking your space. So I would recommend ADA compliance regardless of those types of things. Okay, non-conforming zoning. Can a local agency refuse to permit an ADU or a JDU because of non-conforming zoning? No, they may not. State law limits a local agency to deny a permit application due to the correction of existing non-conforming zoning conditions. These are physical improvements on the property that do not conform to current zoning standards. So in other words, if grandpa back in the 70s built out a living room onto the property that never got permitted, and now you want to apply for an ADU on that property, the ADU cannot be denied. So, and if it's only if it's a threat to public safety and the threat to the construction of the ADU, can they make you fix it? So again, it keeps the inspector in his lane and focused on the ADU only. Parking requirements. Can ADU parking requirements exceed 1 space per unit or bedroom? No. Are certain ADUs exempt from parking requirements? Yes. If an ADU is located within 1/2 mile walking distance of public transit, if it's located in an architecturally and historically significant neighborhood, ADUs that are part of the proposed or existing primary residence or accessory structure, when on-street parking permits are required but not offered to the occupant of the ADU, when there's a car share vehicle located within one block of an ADU, and when a permit application is submitted with a permit application to create a new single-family dwelling or multifamily dwelling on the same lot, provided that the ADU or the parcel satisfies other criteria. So bottom line is there's still exemptions on parking requirements. I still recommend making sure you have parking space. You can always convert that space later to an ADU, when Waymo takes over the world, which I can't wait for. But in the meantime, you're going to get far, far better rents. Rental values on a parking lot is $400 to $500. So I'd make that happen. And they recommend flexibility in ADU parking. What is a permitting agency? In other words, who are these violations? Who's required to follow these laws? Any entity that is involved in the review of the permit for an accessory dwelling unit or JDU in which there's no substitute, including but not limited to applicable planning departments, building departments, utilities, and special districts. Are ADUs permitted ministerially? Yes. ADUs subject to state law must be considered approved or denied and permitted ministerially without the discretionary review or hearing. Development standards must be objective to allow for ministerial review. Objective standards require a uniform benchmark or reference that is knowable by both the permit applicant and the permit agency prior to the submission of an application. So for what are examples of this? They can't specify color or fixed standards such as heights or setbacks or design standards. That's considered subjective. And languages such as privacy, compatibility with neighborhood properties, promoting design harmony and balance, or language like must maintain similar architectural style or requiring high quality materials, all of those are subjective and may not be imposed on ADU development. They don't want any of that subjective nonsense. Under the Permitting Act, the agency has 30 days to determine whether or not an ADU application is complete. If an ADU application is deemed incomplete, the local agency must provide an exhausted list of items. That list shall be limited to those items actually required on the lead agency's submittal requirement checklist. In other words, the agency has to have a checklist and you've got to apply and hit every item on the checklist. If they say you're denied, they have to tell you precisely which items on the checklist were not fulfilled. They cannot then later come back and say, oh, I forgot this. They have to give you an exhaustive list of everything that was done. If the permit is complete, it must be approved or denied ministerially within 60 days from the date the permitting agency received the application. What kind of environmental review is required by ADUs and JDUs? None. Absolutely none. When is the ADU permit application deemed approved without formal review? An ADU permit application is deemed approved when the permitting agency fails to approve or deny a completed application within 60 days of completing application. Now, this is where it's going to get tricky. So you can call it deemed approve in theory and then go build it, but you don't have a permit issued. That is going to get hairy. And frankly, that is how these municipalities have been getting around the rules. They've been saying, oh, we need a little more time. And what are you going to say, right? I mean, that's where it gets like, so it'll be really interesting. If they miss their deadlines and they don't approve it in the 60 days, would you go ahead and start building? I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what I'd do. I'd call HCD. I'd go issue something in the portal, see what the heck is going on. Do ADUs need a certificate of occupancy? Yes. Property owners must obtain a certificate of occupancy from the local agency. That's your final permit approval, but prior to any residential occupancy of the ADU or JDU. See, this is where it's going to get real interesting. Um, what happens? Oh, can the local agency deny a permit application for an unpermitted ADU that was built before 2020? They cannot deny the permit unless there are very specific health and safety violations. And these are really the most basic health and safety stuff. I mean, they can't say, well, you got to bring this up to code unless it's specific health and safety codes. That's it. So it's time to get your unpermitted ADU permitted, and that's important because if something happens in that ADU and it's not permitted, I'm not sure your insurance covers it. I've also had a client who filed a court date. She'd been living in knowingly in an unpermitted ADU that was done to workmanlike manner. I mean, it looked fine. And the court found that because it had not been permitted, they had to pay back this renter all of her rent back for the entire time she had been staying there. Yikes, it was pretty ugly. What happens if an application for an ADU is denied? The permitting agency denying the application must provide the applicant a full set of comments from all reviewers from every permitting agency. The 60-day countdown continues until the complete list is provided. A local agency which has provided a complete set of correction comments has fulfilled this requirement. Following a denial, a subsequent application resets the 60-day period. So again, this is where the local municipalities have been edging around the 60-day rule. They would say, at the last day 60, they'd be like, oh, this is an issue. And then it would reset the permit thing. So then you'd come back with the changes, and then they'd say, oh, I forgot, there's this other issue. And then it would reset the 60 days. That's why permits have been taking so dang long. So HCD is saying, no, you have to provide an exhaustive list and you cannot come back with additional comments. Like, let's get this done, people. So, and then notably at that juncture, this handbook, this addendum says, how can I request technical assistance from HCD about the denial of my ADU application? Yep, and they tell you to go to that portal. So lots of really cool stuff. You can go to hcd.ca.gov and click the ADU section, and it says in there, submit a question, and that is the magic portal questionnaire. Are rental terms allowed? Yes, local agencies may require that ADUs be used for rental terms longer than 30 days. Yeah, you can't Airbnb the ADUs so much anymore. So that's pretty much done. ADUs can be sold separately. Now we get to the original SB bill, SB 9 from 2024. Remember, now we've all talked about ADUs, but the little known fact is SB 9 from 2024 allows you to put a second primary house on a single family zone property in addition to the ADUs. So laws can be implemented in ways that result in developments with both SB 9 units and ADUs. However, in no case does SB 9 require a local agency to allow more than 4 units on a single family lot or in any combination of primary units or JADUs. So bottom line is no more than 4 units. That's it. And remember, SB 79 allowed if you're within 5 miles as a crow flies from a high quality transit zone, then you can add the 10 units or however many units up to 10. So that's something to look about. Setbacks. Can setbacks be required for ADUs? Yes, a setback of no more than 4 feet from the side or rear lines. Are setbacks required for ADUs or JDUs created within an existing structure or replacing an existing structure? No, no setback shall be required. So let's say your back garage, your detached garage is, from the olden days and it's sitting right on the property line. If you demolish that detached garage, you got to move the whole thing 4 feet. But if you keep one wall and just rebuild within that garage, you can keep it right on that property line. So that's important. And by the way, side note, that's why you want to build with ADU specific contractors. I'll repeat the story. I've seen it where a general contractor came in and didn't understand why the architect had specifically instructed to keep up one wall. They knocked it all down and they spent the next 6 months having to resubmit designs and permits to move everything in 4 feet. Ridiculous. So can a local agency impose front setbacks? Yes, a local agency may apply a front yard setback for ADUs, but front yard setbacks cannot preclude an ADU of at least 800 square feet from being built on the property, even if that ADU would exist partially or wholly within the front setback. Holy cow, they're letting you encroach on city setbacks. That's pretty interesting. A local agency require to the ADU to be built in an alternate location to comply with front setbacks? Maybe. Local agencies may set objective standards, including front setbacks. However, a permitting agency may not require that an ADU of up to 800 square feet be built in an alternative location based on discretionary or non-objective standards. So in other words, if they say, we'd rather have you fill in the pool in your backyard and put the ADU there, can't do it. Can't do it. Is there a distance requirement between an ADU and other structures on the lot? Short answer is no. Let's see. Can minimum lot size can a lot size requirement be imposed on ADU? No. No, this is really interesting because now you're getting involved in floor area ratios, which have been a thing forever. Can a lot coverage or floor area ratio preclude an ADU? Answer: limits on lot coverage or any floor area ratio requirements cannot preclude the creation of an ADU of at least 800 square feet. Well, that's going to get interesting for the architects, that's for sure. Can minimum and maximum lot size, unit sizes be established for ADUs? Yes. Maximum size requirements must allow an ADU of at least 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet for ADUs with more than one bedroom. This is where it's really getting confusing. For local agencies without a compliant ADU ordinance, maximum unit sizes are 1,200 square feet for the detached ADU and up to 50% of the floor area of the existing primary dwelling for an attached ADU, at least 800 square feet. Finally, the local agency must not establish an ordinance, a minimum square footage requirement that prohibits the development of an efficiency unit. An efficiency unit may be as small as 150 square feet in floor area. Okay, so now we have a minimum size, 150 feet. That makes sense. It's not very spacious, but hey, if you got somewhere to sleep, sometimes that's all that matters. Can open space or landscaping requirements be used to limit the size or deny an ADU? Nope. Can percentage of the primary dwelling be used to limit the maximum size of an attached ADU? That's the floor area ratio. Yes. Local agencies may utilize a percentage, not greater than 50%, of the existing primary area dwelling as a maximum size for attached ADUs, but only if it does not restrict an ADU size to less than 850 square feet or 1,000 square feet for ADUs with more than one bedroom. Now that's kind of interesting because the sizes are larger than we said. So it's basically, again, knocking out the floor area ratio concept. Can maximum unit sizes exceed 1,200 square feet for ADUs? Yes. If you can adopt less stringent local ADU ordinances. San Diego County, for example, allows up to 1,600 square feet. Solar requirements. Are solar systems required for newly constructed ADUs? Yes. However, ADUs that are constructed within existing space or as an addition to existing homes, including detached additions where an existing detached building is converted from a non-residential to a residential space, are not subject to the California Energy Code requirement to provide solar systems. More and more, I am seeing that the attached ADUs are really the best way to go. They no longer require solar. There's a whole bunch more you can do, but it also gives you flex space. So if you want to like make a bigger house and just knock down that wall, you can do that. That's pretty cool. Um, and it goes into a little bit on tiny homes. And what you need to know is they're getting ready to adopt a statewide standard on tiny homes. And so that would allow, uh, just tiny homes to basically come into play. Okay. Can detached ADUs on multifamily lots be attached to each other? Yes. That makes sense. Again, focus on the attachment. Can a local agency charge impact, connection, or capacity fees for an unpermitted ADU or JADU built prior to January 2020? No. So, and yay, that's good to know because utilities have really been jacking up. Now, they point out, HCE points out, because they've been getting a lot of complaints about utilities, which we're trying to tackle with the Building Industry Association this year. HCD does not regulate the utilities. You would have to file a complaint with the California Public Utilities Commission. Uh, that's that's a bummer. So we'll see how that goes. Um, let's see what else. Can local agencies restrict ADUs based on fire hazard severity zones or other environmental hazards? No, no, they cannot. So the short answer is the maps provided, the very high fire hazard severity zone maps provided by CAL FIRE, they mark ADUs where ADUs may be restricted or prohibited, however, altogether. However, what they're really intended to do is not restrict housing, but govern the building materials used in construction. So they are not intended to restrict housing development. The presence of a high fire hazard severity zone is not a conclusive rationale to warrant restricting ADUs. This is where the prefab units are really cool because they're super highly fire resistant. So they've got a restriction based on the threat to public safety should be supported with findings detailing the impact of ADUs on public safety. And that's on the municipality. They got to prove that it's a threat to public safety to have more housing there. So, or they could just manage their fire areas. Can an ADU application be denied due to lot density? Nope. Um, yeah, ADUs shall not be considered, the square footage of the ADU shall not be considered to exceed the allowable density for the lot. Again, out the window with floor area ratios. Can ADUs serve to qualify for a project for density bonus program pursuant to the state density bonus law, even though the general plan designation on the site allows less than 5 primary units? Yes, this is huge for investors because if you rent to lower income folks, you can get double the number of units on the property. And they're saying, yeah, ADUs count as those double, those units. So I'm not real familiar with density bonus program, but if you're a big investor, you definitely want to take a look at that. Can an ADU be built in a historic district if the primary residence is subject to historic preservation? Yes, they are allowed. Um, they cannot impose standards to prevent adverse impacts on real property that is listed. Da, da, da. So, as long as they don't unreasonably restrict the creation of ADUs, they can incorporate standards into their ordinances, but they got to submit it to HC, which is good. How about the demolition of garages in conjunction of permitting the ADU? The local or permitting agency must review and issue the demo permit and ADU application at the same time. The applicant shall not be required to provide written notice or post a placard for the demolition of the garage unless the property is located in an architecturally and historically significant zone. Again, that was another way that the cities were getting around it. It's like, well, first you got to do a demo permit, and then you got to put the placard, and you violated the placard. Okay, now you can apply for the ADU, et cetera, et cetera. The hand addendum then goes over all the new laws that they're taking into consideration. So I will post this in, if you want to take a look, I will post this in the explanation so you can download it yourself and arm yourself. In addition to, this is the addendum to the 2025 handbook, and you should also print out the 2025 handbook. All of this you can find on the HCD website at hcd.ca.gov. Merry Christmas. It is wonderful to see all of these new rules come out this year. And happy Hanukkah, I might add. This is a gift to all of us as construction is democratized and all of us are learning how to deal with these permit laws. Now you see why the big builders have had so much trouble building housing. So I'm excited to see how this works out. Watch for your local ADU ordinances to be approved. The HCD website monitors that and reports on all that. You're also going to see consistent new applications for the ADUs that are comprehensive. And every municipality has to have a single portal for that universal application. So 2026 is going to be a fun year. I think we're going to see much faster permit times. I think you're going to see a bunch of cities get spanked big time by HCD, and we're going to see a lot more housing. So have a great holiday. I will be working over the holidays. I know you're home, so if you want to book a call, my calendar is open at calendly.com/ADU loans, or go to our website at aduloans.net and you can click the link there to book a call. Just pick a time on my calendar and we can talk through and strategize on your loan strategy to put your property to work for you. Thanks so much.